Okay, well, welcome everyone, and hopefully you're going to enjoy the show. I'm 99% okay, in the sense that my kids are a little bit fluey, so I'm going to try and give you the best of what I can give you of Danny, which is normally very over the top, very charismatic, and if I speak too fast, please let me know, because I get very energized by what I'm talking about. So it can be quite hard to follow, but I try to retain what I'm saying, or like retain myself from going too much. Let me make sure I can actually get this thing working. Okay, so me, myself, and I. The biggest news I will say. Oh, I've got a bit of feedback going on there. No, it's gone. The biggest news I was saying, I got MVP this week. Woo! I've been trying for a while, and I'm now a data platform MVP as of Monday. So, yeah, that's a big news. But who am I? As I said, I'm Danny Kruge. My LinkedIn's up there, so please add me or connect with me. And also, if you have questions about the session afterwards, please feel free to fire at LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active, so you can find me on there a lot. But I'm a SQL DBA at heart. I grew up in England, Leicester, but I currently live in the Netherlands. I'm now a mission critical engineer, which is quite a fancy title, which is basically, I work for a company called Schuberg Phillips. You see the little logo down here. They're based in the Netherlands, and we serve customers who can afford zero downtime. So we have to make sure everything's highly available. We have to make sure they have like offsite backups if they're in Azure, and they have everything the highest spec possible. But how did I get to being either MVP or DBA, MCE? I like to tell you a bit about my story, so you actually know who's speaking to you. Which I think is quite valuable. Otherwise, you're like, who is this guy? He's a bit of a crazy guy. But basically, I actually started off in first line support in the UK. I was working for a retail store called Next. And at that point in time, I was actually studying music production, nothing to do with IT or whatever. I actually failed in IT in school. And it was not my ambition to become what I am today, but I love where I did get to. But basically, when I was at first line support, I was working there for about 6 months, and I was training the whole department after those 6 months. Even though I was classed as new and developing, I started writing documentation for the whole department and training them. But yeah, I started getting put in the office more than I spent working, because I needed more motivation and more work to keep me stimulated. So I wondered what else I could do. I actually started to do studying networks and doing CCNA. So I was out of like a 4,000 people company, the most certified network guy, not doing anything to do with networks in the whole company. And they're like, okay, well, if this guy can learn that, maybe we can teach him SQL. So then I was like, okay, the money sounds good. I can be a SQL DBA. So that came around. And then I got to an age where I didn't want to live in England anymore. And the Netherlands, I found a good opportunity there as a DBA. And then Schubert came knocking on my door, blah, blah, blah. And then it just escalated as who I am today. But I also run Azure Heroes, which is a Netherlands community. And I have 2 kids, and I live in a place called Laren. But I don't want to blab on about myself too much, because I have some cool stuff to show you. So Danny, I want to go over some basics. Sorry?
We have the first question coming in already.
Already?
So since you're living in the Netherlands, do you speak Dutch?
Kleine beetje. This is a funny. So my daughter's 5, and she can speak fluent Dutch, and she is my human translator. Her friends from school will ask her questions in Dutch. She will ask me directly in English, and then reply back to them in Dutch, which is just, for me, amazing. But yes, I speak Dutch like a 2-year-old. Let's put it that way. So if you ask me a question in Dutch, I'll normally reply in English. Yeah, I'm learning. My old neighbors tell me everyone, have you learned Dutch yet? But yeah, good question. Data Factory. So I'll start off with, what is it? I want to go over that, because I don't want to assume that you know everything about Data Factory. I don't want to show maybe you're a beginner and you just want to learn about it and how to utilize it. So I'd like to cover all aspects of it. But it's basically an orchestration tool. So you can use it to move data, to transform, to do jobs with it, activities. And I'll go through some of those concepts and use cases and what I've done in the real world. So it's not just theoretical. I'm going to tell you real stories of how I've used it. And I use it for even triggering SQL scripts. So if you want to do index maintenance, something like that. Oh, there was another one. Was it off the top of my head? I'll come back to it. They're basically running SQL scripts, because if you're using Azure SQL DB, you don't get SQL agent jobs. You have to run your own maintenance sort of scripts, and Microsoft doesn't do all of it for you. They'll do the integration, like integrity checks, but they won't do index rebuilds or anything like that, or statistics. That is the one I was looking for. You have to update your own stats and do that on a regular basis if you wanted to do so. But yes, so we'll go through all different parts. I'll also cover a bit of Synapse, Fabric, and ADF and the differences. And I'll show you a bit of how you can see the differences between them, which luckily Microsoft has done a nice documentation online to show you, okay, what is this versus this? And when Synapse came out, that wasn't really the case. And I've done some main points there, private endpoints and alerting and integration runtime sharing, because this is what I hit when Synapse is around. And obviously Synapse is a bit like RIP, is going into Fabric, but there were some main differences. And if you weren't aware of them, with Synapse, you only got one private endpoint. With Data Factory, you get two. You have one for the orchestration, like for triggering jobs and doing that. So if you wanted to reach to SQL agent and run a SQL script, the actual activity would go over one private endpoint to do so. And you'd have another one for the data traversion. With Synapse, you got one. And I had this argument for Microsoft for 3 months. And what was happening was we had from our on-prem, we had integration runtimes there, and we were connecting into Synapse. Basically, I could see the public IP. And I was like, okay, well, if this is private, why can I see the public IP? No, it's private. Don't worry. I'm telling you it's private. The call. And I was like, no, this doesn't make sense. There should be no reason why I'm seeing a public IP. And they couldn't answer. So it took months before I finally was sitting down with someone. We followed the network traffic and I showed him what I could see. And he said, oh, yeah, you're right. And then they came out, oh, yeah, there's one private endpoint. I was like, wow, okay, this took so long for you to give me the answer. We've been going with the customer to tell them this is fully private. And now I have to turn to them and say, no, it's not. Yeah, that was not fun. Fabric is a bit different how that works. I'm not going to deep dive into that. It's also changing a lot. The one which is alerting, that one is in Fabric and Synapse and different to ADF. And what that is with ADF, you kind of got it out the box. And I can show you that you have like a monitor part you can go to. And there you can define, okay, if a pipeline fails, give me an SMS, email, etc. Synapse, you kind of had to build that out of a box. So you got like an activity to then do this, which, okay, why am I then having to do this in every pipeline when I used to have this out of the box? Fabric is a bit the same. I don't know why I don't like it, because where I come from with the criticality of their environments, we need to know alerting. And I don't want to, if it's having to make it myself, why when it was already in ADF and you've not put it there? I'm really venting to you. These are my frustrations that I've gone through, but you'll get my drift. So I'll show you the best parts of ADF, and it's good to know these are missing. The last one is integration runtime sharing. With Synapse, you couldn't do that. You had to have, you couldn't share integration runtimes between different synapses, synapses, whatever you want to call them, workspaces, Synapse workspaces. With ADF, you could have multiple data factories and you could share integration runtimes between them, save money. Synapse not, which was a shame. The part I wanted to show, so you get something like this from Microsoft, and you can see the data factory, what's in difference in Fabric, and you can go through that. So if you are thinking about using ADF in Fabric, please look at that. I won't mention Fabric too much because I'm sure you've heard it a lot. And this is about ADF and the actual ADF, the real one. It's a good one, in my opinion. Okay, let me get a water. Now, I also like to tell people a bit more about the history of how ADF came about, or what happened to even get there. So you have DTS that came around the year of 2000. It's data transformation services, I think it was. very legacy now, but that was like the first iteration of this sort of tool. Then you had SSIS, and if you ever use that, you'll know the pain that I went through. I never used DTS, but I used SSIS a lot, and it was not as flexible as ADF. You could do a lot with it, but you really had to know how to use it, and I used it heavily in the past, which made it quite easy to adapt to ADF. And SSIS is still heavily used throughout many companies. I've seen it. Still using it as a little comment there. Yeah, I still have to use it, unfortunately. In migrating it, I had to do that recently to a different version. That was interesting because the actual third party who was supporting it didn't know how to migrate it, so I had to do that for them and figure that out. That was fun. And you'll see there's SSIS is also you can put straight into ADF. For the companies who are ginormous legacy SSIS packages, that's going to take them a long time to get into ADF. Microsoft made it easy. You can kind of lift and shift. You can have a SSIS integration runtime, use it there. So I know that really well. I'm glad I've not touched it for a while, but it's still there. You have ADF version 1 that came around 2015. It didn't seem to last long. I never used it. I came around version 2, and that's where I first got into Data Factory. We had a customer who wanted to migrate, that they wanted to get basically Power BI online, and they needed to get data into Azure, and they had a different thing. I'll get into that story more, but this is where I first got into ADF, and I'll show you some of the use cases I got from that. Synapse came along, the bigger brother sister on steroids. Whoa, this was going to be amazing. You had ADF, you had notebooks, you had all this. Was it fun? No, I hated it. There was a lot of things I hit. We hit bugs, we hit different issues, and maybe you had a good time. I did not. When I come from knowing ADF as in and out as I do, using Synapse is just I was missing functionality, like what, and hitting different issues that I didn't have in ADF. So it was like you took some features, put them there, but you left the ones I do need. And when are they coming? I don't know. And that kind of sucked for me. And Fabric, yeah, you know enough about that, but that then came along. So you kind of get the drift. There's these different iterations and similar products going on. So what's next? You would think Fabric would be the end, but yeah, you don't know what could be coming next. You would think this is like the SaaS part, but let's see. History would tell, and we'll see that in future. So I've told you a lot about different tools in that category. And normally I like to keep my slides minimalistic. But do I seem like a minimalistic guy? No. So I like to show you all the different data tools that are currently out there. This one is an image from 2023. Bam. There's a lot. So I won't keep the image on there too long because it's a lot. But there's many data tools out there. So ADF is just one of tons. If you're getting into data engineering, SQL DBA, or who's doing data engineering work or whatever you want to call it, whatever name you want to call it, analyst, whatever you're doing, don't try and be a master of everything. Pick a tool, figure it out, go with it, and you'll sort of work your way into other different products and different tools, but you're never going to grasp all of it. I'm an expert. I call myself an expert in SQL, but I've used it for a long time. It's helped me out with ADF, helped me out with SSIS packages. That is my go-to of where I see any coding language. I'll refer to that. How would I do it in that? Okay, then I can do it out of PowerShell, Terraform, whatever you want to call it. Then I also like to do another one. It's like this is actually on the Microsoft Learn documents. You can get a simple overview of ADF. But it is quite cool. If you actually spend time reading this, you get a go through of how to go through it. So you have to kind of follow it from up here. So I'm doing it with my hands, but you can't see that on the screen. So, let me go back one. Data integration to the scenario, and it gives you, if you actually read it, it's quite nice. And this is actually on the Microsoft Learn website, or you can see a little link down here. And this will go through it. So yes, it seems like a lot if you just go bam. But if you actually take time to go through it, it does make a lot of sense and telling you how to use it, etc. Okay, enough of the wild slides. I've had fun, enjoyed myself, and now I'll calm down. Ish. Back to ADF. The fundamentals. they're on the screen now. So you have pipelines, you have data sets, data flows, activities, and link services. These are like the core components you need. The integration runtime, I'll go through them a bit one by one to elaborate on what they are and how I think of them. Integration runtimes are like the engine, the horsepower to ADF. It's what gives you the compute and it gives you the compute and anything like that. And I'll go through a few different types of what they are because there's not just one. You have link services. That's when you actually connect to, say, like a SQL Server instance. You're choosing, okay, I need to go to SQL or I need to go to a storage account. It's where you're actually grabbing the data from. It's closing link. I like this. I got my little, he's doing the work behind the scenes. I like that. You have activities, and that's where you actually have different tasks. You could call them activities inside of a pipeline. So say copy activity or for each loop or something like that. You have the pipeline. That's obviously the how would you call it? A container of tasks which you can put together, and you can obviously have nested pipelines, etc. And I'll sort of go into that a bit. Data sets, that's one which you have to think of with a actual link service. So if a link service, say, is going towards, okay, I'm going towards SQL. I want to go towards this SQL instance, but a data set, you can kind of say, I just want this table. I want users table, for example, of a database, and then you can sort of define it there. You can do a lot of trickery in there. I won't try and deep dive into that too much because it can go, we could talk for hours, and I'm really going to try and contain how long I talk for. Data flows, I don't have a good relationship with them, and I'll go through why. They're very useful, they're low code, and you can use them. They actually run a Spark cluster underneath, so we'll get into that. But they are useful if you use them in the right way, don't get me wrong. It's just, I would just want to make sure you know that, and we'll go into that. They're the main fundamentals. So to kick it off, types of integration runtimes. You see here, I've got a few different ones. You've got like the one which is main out the box. So you've got the Azure one. As soon as you spin up ADF, you get this one. You get a default auto resolve integration runtime. You can use that as fire at will. It actually scales really well. I utilized it a lot when we had a non VNet integrated network. So you could reach out to different sources for say SQL, etc. It was all public. The way it scaled and actually dealt with the demand was really good. I was very surprised. So that one's nice, but if you're using a VNet integrated network, it won't work so well. You can use it for public, but then you have a bit of trickery. You have to be careful. I came across this with a customer recently where they used it a lot for grabbing to go to, say, an SFTP or something like that to grab some data or a website. For whatever you want to, or API call. If you use an auto resolve to do that, and you have a private network on the internal, which you want to put the storage account on to put the data there, you can set it up to have two integration runtimes, but one will be like the main one. One will be the primary and actually take over, and that's normally like a self-hosted integration runtime. So then, or you have to make sure if whichever one it uses actually can get inside. And if it's an auto resolve, it's not going to work. We have to have that. We have to have a bit of trickery there, where you have to choose one. And then if you have a self-hosted, which means you run your own virtual machine, you have to, it's better to use that and have give it access with like a NSG rule out or something like that. The SSIS one I've never used. Luckily, I've been fortunate enough that I've not just lifted and shifted SSIS into ADF. I've always built from scratch or migrated customers already using ADF. But that one is there if you do have to use it. There's one more not on the screen, which is the VNet one. And this one is cool. It never used to be. And the reason why, there's a story which I'll go into further in a minute, where I years ago when I first started using this, it didn't scale too well. You kind of just had a bit of a black box where this was running. They would just give you a random VM, and there wasn't much compute. Now you can actually like size it yourself and get a lot more power for your money or whatever. You can say 4 cores, do this, 8 cores, so you can beef it up. In the past, you couldn't, and it was just running horrendously slow. But now it's good, and there's a lot of different use cases you can use for this. But this is very useful if you don't want to manage a self-hosted integration runtime yourself. This one you can use to actually have connections into a VNet integrated network. It will do private endpoints around. This is very useful if you don't have a DevOps team. I come from an engineering background as well, so I can build infrastructure as code, I can build all different VMs and everything, and I know network knowledge, so I can build it all for the customer. This is good if you don't have that experience or you don't have that within your company. You can start sending up a network, but you have to be careful. It can get messy very fast. If you have one ADF in dev, you could already connect that to prod. There's nothing stopping you. There's no firewall, anything. This can go cross-tenant. This can go wherever you want. So it's dangerous. If someone just approves that on the other side, you've got connection going in there. As long as you've got the credentials, you're getting in. So you don't want dev just poking around everywhere. It shouldn't be going into production. Well, if you are doing that, please don't. Production should stay with production. Different story. But you get my drift. So it's good if you don't have, if you want to start doing private networks, it's good to get into it. But if you have a team who knows how to build VMs, who knows how to do the network side with different NSG rules, subnets, and firewalling, etc., then you can utilize self-hosted integration runtimes more. Okay. Story time. I have a different talk which I do a deep dive into how this is done, but you get a bit of both, which is nice. You get to learn about this story as well as all the tools I did behind it. But basically, the story is we had a customer who came along and they actually had a different third party who they hired to do their, they had SharePoint Online, they had SSRS reports. Yes, they're still used. I'm sure there's some people in the call using SSRS is probably more outdated than SSIS, but it is still used. They wanted to get to Power BI Online from SSRS. Let's just say the people who was designing this from said third party didn't design it well. Me being the SQL DBA, I wasn't aware of this project until it came biting me in the butt. And why I say that, because one day I got a call, acceptance is not working. I can't, everything I query is just not working. Everything's standing still. What is going on? I have no idea. Like from my point, I've had no alerts or anything like that. I don't see much going on. We don't really alert on the acceptance environment other than disk space or something like that to make sure it doesn't completely go boom. But what had happened is they did a query, a SQL query from Power BI, the report directly to do like a direct query into the SQL server on-prem. So it's going from Power BI online to on-prem. And what they didn't estimate was the size of the data. So it's 200 million rows and 60 gigs of data for this one report. They were trying to pull back. This query was running for 18 hours and still didn't finish. And I basically had to kill it because everything was dying. So it was like, okay, guys, explain to me, what are you trying to do? So that happened. And they kind of underestimated what was the overall size of the report to actually pull it in. So like for one, data sets aren't big enough for that, for what they was using in the Power BI capacity side. They had 10 gigabyte size limit for what they chose and for then. So then they had to also change that. But basically, this is where I first got involved. It was my first time getting into Azure, and we're talking 4 years ago. I started using ADF, so it's not I'm not a veteran of it, but I got to grips with it fast. But basically, I want to show you the steps that I took to get this down to 10 minutes. And that was using ADF. We basically could split the query dynamically. I'll show you how to do that. So we could fire multiple queries at the same time. We put it onto a storage account and then they could take over. So the report wasn't ready in 10 minutes, but we could get the data from on-prem of over 60 gigs into a storage account in 10 minutes. I tried all different methods. We tried, data migration services that would actually lift the data, the SQL database across. I think that took 2 hours. So already I was making improvements. But what I could tell is one of the things I've not got into is their setup was a Power BI data gateway. Basically, what I could see is when this query was running, it would grab 16 megabyte chunks every 4 seconds, compress it, and shoot it over the line. And if you do the maths, I can't remember what number it was, but it's going to take a hell of a long time. And that's where I didn't really have a good relationship with Power BI gateways. But integration runtimes, I can utilize them a lot more, and I can give it a lot more power. So we had to redesign this whole structure, and you can give a lot more oomph to integration runtimes. And I've never replicated this before, but tonight I'll be able to show that to you. I've actually rebuilt it, so I can actually show you what I mean in a demo, which is pretty cool. As I go along, I'll probably go more into the story and show you more explanations about how. But one of the main tools I also used was going onto the Power BI Gateway VM as it was then. I think it's from Adam Mechanic. He has a query store stress test or something like that. It's from one of the SQL guys from the past. It's called like query stress, whatever it is. I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, you have a small little executable you can run. You can put your SQL query in there. And you can say, okay, I want to run this 20 times and so on. It could pull the data in about 6 minutes. So I knew the network wasn't a problem. The compute wasn't a problem. I could get the data onto the VM in time. So then, okay, where is the issue lying? So you have to try to do a few stepping stones. And I could also get the data out within a few hours. Okay, that's also showing me the main issue isn't SQL, which obviously the third party always says it is. It's your problem. So I had to prove it's not. But anyway, I'll show you what I could do with copy activity and going through it. So yes, speed and power. So I'll go through a bit of the theoretical side of it before I show you the full demo of it. And I hope all of you are still on track. Please fire a question. If you do have one, if you don't understand it, please just ask away. I'm more than happy to answer. So what you can do in the copy activity, you basically can do a dynamic partition. So you'll see it here. I always do that. I'm so sorry. I'll try not to click. I'm just very good at, I like to click happy. Dynamic range. So you can choose that. So normally it'll be set to none, but what you can do, so say you have a table, you have an ID column, and that's a primary key, you can partition upon that. For the customer I was dealing with that had the issue, they had an ID column. It was called, say, customer ID. There was maybe 60 different values in there, and then they had 200 million rows, but I could identify those 200 million between like 60. And so then I did like an upper bound of like this 1200, and lower bound of this. If you've never seen this before, what Microsoft will normally do in the back end is split that into 8 different queries for you. So the upper bound will be with a where clause saying, okay, we're greater than 1200 and we're lower than 20. And then it already splits it for you. So you don't have to write multiple where clauses. Boom, cool. But you can go even further. Before I say, well, I'll hold my horses, but what you can also do is, and so this is on the source side. So you can choose how you do that to split that part, which is very useful. And also what you can do is choose on the sync side, so the target of the block size, and you can even say the max rows per file. Oh, why might you do that? I'll tell you. What we did, I could fire the data there very fast. So I could split the queries, I could put it there, but what happened was I then had multiple files in the storage account, but various sizes, because I split it. I just said, okay, I can see a bit of upper bound here, lower bound there, but in the middle, maybe there was a year where there was, if you're talking about, like, say, a sales table, there was billions of sales in one year and not the other. So then you have this big, okay, 66 gigs of this one, 16 in this one, 2 gigs in this one. The third party wasn't always bad. They actually bought a new company who knew a lot about ADF, and they came on board, and they wanted to get the data from a storage account and put it into a Azure SQL database. When they wanted to lift the data, they basically did iterations on each file using copy activity, also on firing it into SQL. You may ask why we didn't just put it into SQL. Good question if you were thinking that. If you didn't, let's get his brains working. we could always then run the pipeline. The data was already out. So you're going from on-prem to Azure. I put it there. They could fire it back into SQL as much as they want, or they do iterations. They don't have to bother me, and we don't have to do the full run. The data's already there. Plus, there was a splitting step between who owned what. I get the data to Azure. They take over from there. So it's a good distinguish between the two, and we had two separate data factories. I had my stuff in mine, their stuff in theirs. If it alerts, we know who's at fault, sort of like that. That's why. But the I have extreme ADHD, so hence why my stories might go here, there, everywhere. I try and control it, but it gets a bit wild. Back to max rows per file, and what I'm explaining this for is then if I said only 850, whatever it is, or 850,000 rows per file, I think it's that. My eyes are a bit bubbly. Then that would make sure it's like 2 gigs per file that was being iterated. So then it was creating multiple files for me without me even specifying that. It would always say, okay, I've hit the maximum number of rows, start creating, and then the data was similar sizes. So when they moved the data into SQL, it wasn't just having one running for say half an hour and one running in 2 minutes. They could go a bit faster. What you can also do is the degree of parallelism. And normally I can't say that word, but I did. Woohoo! So you can have the max copy of parallelism. So how many queries you're firing at the same time. So I said there was a default of like 8. You can split this into 32. I think that's one of the highest numbers you can do. But even if then you do it per multiple rows, you can also fire even more. There's a bit of a formula there to do it. I don't know all the ins and outs, and I don't try and play with it too much because it's the same point I have for the DIUs, they call it, the data integration units. I'm good at this stuff. I've never been able to beat this. I always just set it to auto. I tried to play around with it. Because these settings, please don't just use what I'm showing you on the screen. I tested this heavily. I ran this so many times it made me want to just cry in a room. But it's like a dark art, you can call it. You have to keep specifying different ways to try and find the sweet spot. And that just doesn't mean it's going to land and be there always. It may last a month, 2 months. You have to be sure that what your optimization is doing also fits the way the data is coming in and so on. It's not a static database. So there will be data coming in, and you need a good variant that covers a good basis. And I'll kind of show a bit of trickery of that, hopefully. That was one part. So I'm only talking about one table I was doing that for. I'm partitioning one table. What about the rest? So you also have to think about that. And the way the use case I'm going for, they had legacy systems on-prem. Something I forgot to mention, but they would always truncate all the tables, reload them. Why? Yeah, for whoever designed it, they couldn't get away from that for a long while before redesigning the whole thing. It was just a bit of a mess from their predecessors who also looked after them. But that meant that's why I wasn't doing like incremental loads, etc. Sometimes you can't do that. You have to do a full load, hence why I'm giving you these tricks. And also you could be dealing with big amounts of data where you do need these tricks as well. So there is parts. But for all the tables on-prem, you can do like a lookup. So you have a lookup, you can get all the schema, you can get all the table lists, and then you can generate a for each loop, and it will create multiple copies of every single table. And I should be able to show that in a demo to maybe explain it better. And also why I have this, which looks a bit bizarre, why that came about, because it did also happen where I had an issue with that, why it's set up like that. But within the feedback for each loop, you can also pass in like parameters, etc. So you can actually get, okay, I've got the table list. You can pass that into the next activity, say in a for each, and iterate over this table list, like you would in PowerShell with an array. You get the list, you pass it on, and say, okay, iterate over these. It's similar how you do it, and then that one will also, you can set the copy of parallelism, and that's set to 4. Why? Because this is what I mean about the sweet spot. If you've got one running 32 and you need that power for that heavy table, the one which is 200 million rows, 60 gigs, you need the power there. Why, if these ones are smaller, would I give it so much compute? And also, you don't want to just blow all your money in, on a VM with amounts of cores. You need to make sure you utilize the memory well and utilize the CPU as well. It's different if you're using auto resolve, but you also you have to pay for that. So you have to find a sweet spot. Okay, how fast do we need it, and how where does that lie? And I did a few tests yesterday, which shows you a bit of differences where that can happen. It can either do you a favor or not. It's not like just set biggest numbers of all. It doesn't work like that. You can also do the copy activity. So you see, you can actually get for storage accounts. You can even get, you can specify like wild paths, etc. So you don't have to hard code each one. You can actually put like a wild path of saying, okay, the container I want to go for a directory, and there's all different trickery in there. But what the third party did do well, they had a copy activity specified in JSON, which they kept on a storage account. They would actually look that up, and that JSON, which was in there, actually specified each table that they wanted a copy activity to run at every specification, and then they could just loop over that, and they'd have like 20 to 50 copy activities running and hitting Azure SQL. And that would also, it's a similar effect of like creating multiple to hit this database, similar to what I did on-prem, but doing it vice versa. So there's also trickery of that as well, which I won't deep dive into too much on this one. But they did it like this. So they had they would pick up the config. So they did a lookup, pass it straight in, and then it would generate multiple copy activities on there, which is super powerful. And they also split it across as well to even get even more speed, which is good. There's multiple ways of doing that, and all the ways I'm showing you is probably not the only way. There's a gazillion ways you can optimize these things. This one's a funny one. And it is from actual a real world scenario that happened. For that same use case, they were doing like validations on the database using stored procedures. But what would happen was the way they fed it in, and I didn't want to go into it too much because the guy who designed it must have been a madman. But basically, they would read from a table and then utilize it from there. But they had like 600 stored procedures running every time they were doing this report to validate. And what you have to realize, if you trigger a store procedure from ADF, it's different from SQL agent job. It doesn't live with the SQL instance. It's a cloud. It's in the clouds. It's somewhere else. But what I saw was every single store procedure would take maybe a second, 2 seconds, maybe 5 seconds or 12 seconds to initiate the connection, then run the store procedure, and then come back and say successful, next, or and so on. And you had that 600 times. That was wasting hours upon hours and hours. My way was not the best way in this way. They redesigned it better, but what I did was basically the chunk of store procedures they had, I ripped out quite a few, put it in one massive store procedure, put logging in between each step. So then if one part of it failed, it would then log where it did fail. If you don't do that, you've got a huge thing to debug if it does. But please, it's a dirty way, but it worked because it stopped all these connections each time. So instead of it running for like 3 hours, it ran in 10 minutes because it would just go and straight through. Whoops, that's me hitting my keyboard because I'm getting too involved. But you get my, be careful how you design this thing, basically. That can catch you off guard. You just, you can't use it in the same way you would. Data flows. Why I have this as a story time. We had a different scenario where you have to utilize the right tool for the job. And you may, if you're not using a data flow, so what they could be used for, which is like transformation and different parts like that, it doesn't really make sense to use one if you're just moving data, which in one scenario I came across, they had pipelines which were running for hours. And it was just a copy activity, basically. They were moving data from source to target. But each time it had to spin up a data flow Spark cluster. And if you don't know, that takes 4 or 5 minutes to do. So you're waiting that each time it's going, and it was when it actually ran, it ran within 5 seconds. So all that time's being wasted. Plus, you're paying for that. If you do it through like a copy activity, even if you did it with an auto resolve or a VNet integrated integration runtime or self-hosted, boom, it runs, and it ran super fast. Once we converted those into copy activities, which is not too hard, it's quite easy to convert because they're quite easy to set up in that sense. they saved a lot of time. They also it ran so much faster. So please be careful when you're using data flows. There's a time and a place to use them. And even on Microsoft documentation, it makes me laugh every time. You'll see a cluster startup time, 4 minutes. But how long did this take to run? Processing time, 1 minute. So you wait 4 minutes for it to run for 1 minute. This is on their Microsoft documentation on the print screen, which for me, it makes me laugh. Please be careful how you use it. If you need to do all these also transformations or conversions or whatever you're doing, filtering, maybe use SQL. You can just trigger it with the store procedure. That's going to run in less than the 4 minute startup time. I'm talking seconds instead of that. Yes, it's code. It's not low code. With the tools nowadays, when I first started speaking about this, it was before ChatGPT and everything like that. Doesn't mean just go vibe coding, but you get my drift. You could figure it out that way rather than going down this route, because please know, I have seen terrible data flows where there has been so many activities in there. I can't read that. There's no documentation. I have to click on every single one of those things to figure out what some person did. Please don't be that person. If you write it in code, I can read it. I know what it is, or you can even get that as documentation. There's not really, I'm not aware of where you can export this and say, please explain this to me. Maybe there is. I've not seen it, but you get my rant. What you can also do is choose compute type, etc. for the data flows. You can use data flows smartly in the sense of the TTL, the time to live. So if you spin this up in the morning and you do all your data, you have a pipeline that needs to run for 2 hours or so on, and the activities run one after another, cool. That could be a good use case. But if you don't and you run it every 10 minutes and the time to live is not staying up, so it scales down, you're waiting every time. That's not fun. That's just wasting time and money for yourself. So just be careful if you use it, and if you are using it, check how you're using it. Whoa, we're there. Okay, demo time. I have no idea because I'm not keeping track of time. So hopefully I'm doing okay. I'm sure I'm going to get shouted at if I rant over. But let's get into some fun stuff. So for you beautiful people, I created some fun stuff. So let's go back a step. I actually have a resource group called Data Mines, and I have a few different resources in here to give you a bit of an overview. So I have like a storage account. I have a VM, which I'm running integration runtimes on because I want to show you what I did and how I did it, and how I can use that to connect into different resources. And I have a SQL database here, well, obviously a SQL instance, and that's with Stack Overflow 2010. So I'm using that as a database, which I can show. So if I show you a bit of an underlying part here, I name a lot of things Kruge. Yeah, it just makes it easier for me to know where my resources are and find them. It's just a pet thing that I do. I like it. But this is the Stack Overflow database. So you have a few different tables in there. There's a few which, if you know the database, are not there. These are mine. I also have a talk about scripting permissions automated. So you can do like a DR on one-click deployment. So you have history of all your permissions and SQL logins into every single layer. But that's not for today. So you see the tables here. This gives you a general overview of the SQL setup, of what we're going to be dealing with. Ignore this part for now. We'll get into that. So with ADF, that's what we're going to go over. I think I have it open here. The homepage, you might be familiar with it, you might not. I won't rant on too much about it because I want to get into the cool stuff about it and the details, because I've kind of gone over a lot of high-level stuff. I want to really get down and dirty into it. But this is the homepage, and you can get different parts on there. You can even get templates, which you can start off with. You can see different parts on there to get involved. But I already have things set up. So if we click on Manage, what you'll see here is the integration runtimes, which I was explaining before. This is the default one, which I meant. So this one's running publicly. It's a shared resource. Be careful if you're using it, especially with private information. There was something that happened years ago with these where, people managed to get into those integration runtimes and you see stuff. So if you're using sensitive information, I heavily recommend using your own like self-hosted VMs where it's not shared. Yes, they fixed it, but yeah, you run. It's up to you. I don't sleep well at night knowing that. So being me, I have my own integration runtime, which is running in a VM in Azure. So that's quite straightforward. Well, we also have, if we go through, you get triggers, etc. Let's quickly go over some of these. Triggers can be if you want to schedule your pipelines, say 4 a.m., 10 a.m., whatever, like you would a SQL agent job. I go back to that because I know SQL. So you can trigger it on that. You can also do, say, a file has just been generated on a storage account, set it up like that. It would trigger on activity-based stuff. You can connect it to Git, which is good if you have a DTAP flow, which you should, or a sort of flow to move up environments. Obviously, Fabric's being pushed, so you'll see that. The integration runtimes, the link services, which I was explaining before. So yes, my naming convention sucks because this is a demo. Don't be me. Don't do that in a live environment. You need to name them after what they are and represent. It makes life a lot easier to debug and know what's going on. But you'll see a few examples in here of storage accounts, Dataverse. There are tons of connectors out there out the box, which makes this tool super useful. And using it for, I've used this for data migrations, moving data from tenant to tenant even. I've used it for different use cases and also for daily reports as well. You get settings. I used this recently because if you don't have this switched on, you don't get a overview of the costs. This is easy to switch on. You can just click it and publish it. I don't think this, from what I read on the documentation, you can't put this in a CI/CD flow. So you have to put this if you're in prod. You have to set that manually in there. And then if you look at cost analysis on the subscription level, you get a breakdown per pipeline of the cost. So that's pretty cool to know where your cost is going, because as a customer I'm dealing with a 15K per month data factory. So it's good for them to really find out, okay, how can we optimize it to lower their costs? Monitor, this is where you can actually see everything in there of all the pipeline runs. The pet peeve I had explaining about before is alerts and metrics, because you can actually set an alert rule, which you couldn't in Synapse. And in Fabric, I think when I clicked on alert, it took me to, I can't remember what it was, a real-time part of Fabric, which I don't really classify alert, but they were doing it as like a trigger-based thing. If, say, if your refrigerator went on 5 degrees, then you do something under that. And that's not an alert for me. An alert is if something goes wrong and not on the data on the actual activities. But yeah, that's my thing. Cool. So monitoring wise, pipeline wise, if you go on author, the pencil, you'll get a breakdown. It's very good to folderize your stuff to make it clear of what's where. So I have like on-prem to ADLS, and that's all the pipelines in there to move the data from on-prem to the Azure Data Lake Storage. If you go from Azure Data Lake Storage to Azure SQL, you get the drift of it. The fun stuff I've set up today is the Data Mines one. So what I've got in here, I basically have a pipeline, and you see it's a pipeline that executes another pipeline. I do that so then when you have you look at the monitoring level, you get separate activities in there. If you do it as one big pipeline, you just see one pipeline failed. You don't know which step it was easily. You have to go in there, debug it. And if it's massive, that's a pain in the butt. What I like to do is don't go crazy and have pipeline. That also sucks because you have to go in and you go nested. Keep it simple, but in this way you can click in, and then when you actually run it in the monitor, I'll show you, you'll see different little inputs when it loads. Oh, it's because I'm on the wrong one. Apologies. You'll see it comes up like this. So data mines is the master or main, and then it triggers all these other ones. If you don't do it, I just have data mines, and it's not easy to get in there. But then I have this one. Why am I doing this? I'm cleaning up all the old files in the storage account. I don't want them there for this instance. I want to wipe them all away, so I'm just going to delete them all. And what I have, if I go back to data mines, I have some cool stuff here. So I have multiple pipelines. The parts here, I have one for all tables. So I actually want to trigger and get all the tables apart from some of the largest ones, which are votes or posts. How do I know that? Let's go back to SQL. Did I write these queries? No, I'm lazy. I want to be lazy. When I first did this years ago, yes, I did. Now I probably ripped it from Stack Overflow itself. But now just ChatGPT, okay, well, find me the list of largest tables in Azure SQL, and I can get it. So you get the row counts, you get the total space used. If you do, you can go about this way, so you sort of get a grip of where the slowest pipeline may be. But if you just run like a copy activity and doing it across all tables, which you could do, you could see which one is also slowest if you're doing testing and stuff like that. And then you get a grip, okay, maybe I need to partition this one in a way, etc. it's good to know that. But because I've done this before, I sort of know if it's a high row count, which is like this one in votes, maybe it's good to split that one out. But it's not that big, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But on a bigger scale, it would be an issue. So if you're talking about 60 gigs of data, etc. So 6 gigs I also see. That's also a good one maybe to partition. Obviously, if you're talking about 6 gigs of data, it's not huge. But this is a demo, remember that please. But if you talk about 600 gigs, whatever number you want, you get my idea. So, okay, I know these are the largest ones. Maybe I need to scale those out. That's good. I'm going to do that. So I create a pipeline for that and say we're going to votes. I'm going to do that on here. I'm going to open that one up and you'll see it like this. Why have I got copy, delete, copy, delete, copy, delete? What you need to see is that that's on error. Why did I do this? I didn't do this at first. I used to have a copy and a delete. If it failed, it would delete. The problem was I like to do retries on my copy activity because I don't want to be woken up at night, or I don't want it to fail on a transient error, which could be a network blip or anything, and it works next time. You could do 3 retries within 30-second intervals. It's good to do that. But this bit me hard because if you're doing from SQL Server to a storage account, if you're doing from SQL to SQL or something, or storage account to SQL, you can do a truncate table on copy. So you can actually initiate a pre-copy script. You can't on the storage account. So what happened is on the retry, basically it copied like 10 million rows, failed. Those 10 million rows stayed there. And then I copied again, and then reports went haywire, financial institution went wild, and I had to fix it. And this is the way I fixed it. So every time it failed, okay, upon retry, you delete it all. And then if it works, okay, good, and so on. You get this. It's not a perfect version, but be careful how you do that. And this fixed the issue going forward. Let's open this one up. So yeah, no retries on this one, but this is the demo. But you would set the retries here, so you can set that to 3. Make sure you understand what the timeout is doing. This used to be 7 days. If you don't set this and ADF runs wild because it can, you won't know for a while until it fails and times out. Now it's like, was it maximum default is 12 hours. It's still a long time. So make sure you know what your average time is. Say it's an hour. I always do 3 hours because you do get sometimes a busy or a different different way of it's working. So it's good to have that flexibility. But if over 3 hours you know something's gone horrendously wrong, maybe, so it's good to have a look at it. What you also have, so what you can do, I have my data set, which is like a DBO votes, and then I can specify the schema. Why have I done this? Because I can do this. This is heavily documented in Microsoft documents, and they will show you how to do this as well in step-by-step guides. This is how I learned to do it, by just following Microsoft Learn, and I just put it into practice. And basically what this does is you set up the dynamic where clause, and that would be what you do down here. So you have the upper bound, the lower bound, and then it splits it into separate where clauses. It does the work for you, which is really nice. Yes, these upper bound and lower bound are hard-coded in this instance, but you could do a lookup activity over here. And you could look for, okay, what is the max rows? What is this? And the query that I'm doing, I'll show you in SQL, you could do that before and pass that in. So you sort of have a bit more automation between the steps. I didn't do that. It wasn't changing too much, and I'm a bit of a control freak, so I kept on top of it, and I didn't mind. You also see the max rows per file here, and you can also then do the settings, which I showed before. So I have this one set as 8. So then that's for votes. What I also wanted to show is how it versus, like, if you do multiple queries versus one query. So this is doing 1. It's just getting, it's not doing a partition at all on that. So you see the speed of it. And it's different. You get different flavors between sizes of data. The lookup table list, that just is a lookup. There's a bit more setup you need to do to this. I want to quickly go over it, but I can check this. I can get the schema, the table name from the SQL instance itself or database. And I can also say, don't use votes because I'm already using that one. I don't need you to copy it as well. I'm already doing it. So you can do that. And then that gets passed in, and you'll see it via like a parameter value. You can say, okay, output, the lookup table list output value, you pass that in. If we go into this one, you should be able to see, okay, the table list array was on that first part. And if I actually think, if I open it up, activities, yeah, I'm going a bit fast because there's a lot to cover. And this is not the main point I need to go through is every step, but the main point is like you pass it in like this. So you get the table schema, table name, and you have it in parameters, and you pass it in, and the for each loop iterates on each one of those, and you get multiple copy tasks. It's a bit more advanced. It's freaking cool because you can use this for so many different aspects and automating the hell out of ADF, which is super powerful. Then I've also got posts. I actually made a boo-boo because I was just taking it for granted, thinking this would be the largest table. It's got the most amount of rows. It's not true. This actually has less rows, but more data. So then I spent last night fixing my boo-boo, and I made one about posts. And this will actually do a partition on there. So I actually got the schema again. You can actually just do right-click in SSMS, create table, rip it out, or select from top 1,000 rows, and you can just rip out the top part from the top. You see the dynamic aware clause again, and you'll see I've got different row numbers in there, and I'll show you how I got that. I've also changed the block size. I've set that to the max, I think it is, which is 100 megs. Between 4 and 100 you can do. This is, you have to play with it. All these settings, this is not, what I'm showing you is not just take it for granted. You have to play with this, and I'll show you what I was doing last night, because I also got funky behavior, which I've not seen before. And you see 32 parallelism. So they're my main ones I've got there. If we trigger that now, we can go through. Actually, before I do, I missed a part. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm excited. Let's show you here. So how I got those values of the row. Did I write this? No, but I can go through it. You have the total numbers of rows. It'll actually, you can set a variable for that, and then you do a count on the total rows per partition, split that into 8. And then you can actually put that into put them all into a temp table of the IDs. And then we do a CTE over, and we're finding, okay, how many, what is the row number basically after I get to divided by 8 rows. So then that's where it comes down to here. It's very easy to, if you need something like this, an example, let me know, but I just asked ChatGPT a simple prompt of give me this is what I'm trying to do, and this is what I got out, and it worked perfectly fine. So I did it for votes table, and also for the largest table by size, so posts. The exact same query, obviously I change the variables, otherwise you have a bit of a boo-boo. Trust me, I went into that and also renamed the temp table if you're doing stuff like this, but this will give you the output like below. So you'll see, okay, the minimum is ID is 1, for this one it's 4, and you get the drift of where it's going. So then I can split, okay, I don't want to anything above 4 because that'd be weird. I want everything less than 65, whatever it is, and anything higher than this. So I've split it into those 8 partitions. You could split it more or less however you want. I was just showing it as a demo in that sense. You could do it in 4, you could do it in less, it's up to you. But that's how I figured this out. So then I know the size of the different ones, the row counts. From the row counts, I can sort of figure out, okay, I know what I'm dealing with and which tables I need to target. So then I did the copy activities of the upper bound, lower bound on that. So if we trigger this, we'll do the full pipeline. I trigger this now. Hopefully my integration runtime is still running, which it should be, unless it's scaled down, but we'll find out if it breaks or not. But we'll run this one now. You'll see it's queued. If we open it up, get a bit more information. So you see which step is running. It's probably cleaning up from yesterday. It'll be deleting everything that it can find. Then it starts to run everything. So what's cool now, we can go to SQL and see what's going on. And all that stuff that I've been telling you, if I hit F5, I can see what's running right now. You'll see it's actually splitting all these queries. So I'm firing like everything at it. And I'm just, I could be killing the VM for all I know. But I've not gone into that. Yes, you should check that. You want to see your memory, your CPU usage. Memory gets hit harder most. Normally what happens is if you're using it the way I'm doing now, you're going from SQL Server to storage account, you might be using a Parquet file. And then the integration runtime compresses it and shoots it across the wire, the network, whatever you want to call it. So then you get the data, it's grabbing it, compressing it, firing out, and sometimes it's not as fast to do that as it's getting it in. So it starts to stack up. So normally you want to make sure your memory is not hitting a limit, because that will break pipelines. If you're firing it too much, Pipelines will fail on the for each loop. If you've got the retry, that helps, but you're putting the VM under pressure. SQL Server, you also want to make sure you're not killing your SQL Server. I was running this at times when I knew the SQL Server was quiet and I could hit it for 10 minutes, give it everything. I don't mind what just give everything it's got for that 10 minutes. After that, it will be fine. So you can see like this one's just doing select star from posts. This is one I've purposely not partitioned. I did a partition version and not, so you can sort of see the difference in how I've done it there. But it's sort of coming to an end because you see the different queries going. So that's pretty cool. And if we go back into ADF, you'll also see certain ones will be finishing. Like so. So we've got votes is finished, posts is still going. The copy part, it could be finishing up. And we also got the executional tables. And what you'll see, because these are showing like an overview of so on, but what I mean by how many iterations happen for here, if we deep dive a bit more, you'll see this is all the different copy activities that happened. So when I did my for each, you can actually have it running in parallel as well. So they're not just rating on each other. You can have it either sequential or just boom, go. So I had, I think, 4 running at the same time. And then you can also see maybe which one was taking the longest time. And if you go into this, if you go on the input, you can see, okay, post table. That's what the query that was running. What happened here? Okay, I got 5 gigs, 5.9 gigs of data. It read 3.7 million rows. It actually writ 1 file. You see rows written as well, which is nice. How many connections and normally how many peak connections on-prem. It only did 1. And I'll show you a difference for the other one, the data written and how long it took. So you can also see the throughput, which is also very useful to know to how you're mitigating between the different ones. Let's see. If we go back. Activity runs. So say I want to see the difference between the, so we just saw that was 77 megabytes. It took a minute or so. What we can do is go into the votes copy. I've got to go here. Click into it. You see this one run here. If I click on it, I get a bit more information here. Obviously, you get the same stuff. This is showing you the whole schema query that it did. Bam. Okay, this one actually took less throughput, which I wasn't getting yesterday, but I'll show you a bit difference between it. That all depends on how much you're setting for the single query. This all varies on size. So if you're dealing with 60 gigs compared to 5 gigs, you're also going to get difference. Sometimes it's not smart to partition it. You don't need to partition it if you don't need to. This is if you're dealing with data which is taking too long. Say it's running for half an hour, maybe you need that in 10 minutes. Maybe it's good to actually split it out, and you can split it by date. You can split it by ID. There are multiple ways you can split it. You know the data best, so you can figure that out and test it. But you can see this one actually had 6 connections going onto the database. It grabbed it, pushed it across, and put it onto the storage account. And what I also wanted to show is like the difference in votes. So when I did the execute votes, and this one's where it's partitioned, it did 9 queries against the database, 10 million rows, and it does 15 megs. You see a difference there. It's also writing to 8 files. That's because we also said, okay, 850,000 rows per file, so it split it out more. That can either go against you or better. You have to play with those numbers and find the sweet spot. It's not always one size fits all. That's something to be careful of. And then if we go to here, we'll see the votes copy 1. Single run. So there's a 9 megs, but still 40 seconds it ran in. So it still goes fast. So this one you also don't need to split out. This, if you ran this on its own, it's perfectly fine. So even though the numbers are 10 million, yeah, SQL deals with it fine. Getting the query, the VM dealt with it fine. So you sort of see there's a lot to play with. And what I was playing with last night, if I go to all pipeline runs, hopefully I can show you. There's a few different numbers what I could generate. So we have on-prem to post ADLS, it was 2 minutes, 18 seconds. I was able to run that in also 40 seconds sometimes if I actually played with the numbers right. So you see here was 1 minute 15. Why was this one then maybe 2 minutes 18? If we look at this one. You can see here, so it's also 6 connections, but this was a lot less throughput. And that also depends on which other pipelines are doing. So if you set 100 megs on each block size for each different run, and what I mean by that if we go, bada bing, bada boom. Okay, go back one here. If we did that, loading to data mines here. If we set all these to 32 parallelism and also the huge block size, yeah, they're all fighting for the resources. You have to be careful how you justify them and what your settings are. But that sort of gives you a big insight of how that is being used. Okay, I think I showed a lot there, and I do have some more bits to tell before I go, but hopefully that gives you a grasp. A lot of this is fully available online. I've done this talk a few times, and I think I heard this was being recorded, so you'll be able to go back and figure it out more or go through it. Maybe it's slower, but I speak fast. I apologize. So I have a bit of lessons learned, and the first one is here. If you have multiple pipelines you're executing, it looks a bit strange. Why would you have duplicate pipelines of the same thing if you're failing? Reason being, when one of these fails, if you only have all the red lines going to one box, so say this one failed and they were all going onto one of these pipelines, you only had one of these boxes, forget that all of these are here. That means every single one has to fail before it triggers that. Yeah, that's not the behavior you want. So you have to set it up in this sense that if you have sort of like a failure notification or something that needs to happen upon failure, yeah, unfortunately, it's a bit of the design of how you need to do it. It's how it was done. What I've learned over the time of using this is what I said at the beginning when I showed the demo. Naming an organization is very important. And also, if you're doing it for integration runtimes, don't call your integration runtime dev if you're going across DTAP, because that will be copied and put into all these different parts. Same with pipelines, etc. Call it a generic name that fits every environment, that fits DTAP. Because that will be, if you're using CI/CD, then it will be copied across and you have things in there called dev, prod, whatever, and you don't want that. You're having a mix of everything. Fault tolerance, I have a page next, which I'll go over, but you have to be very careful how you utilize that, and I'll go into why on the next slide. Rows per file I went into, so I'm not going to blab on about that again. And I also told you about the retries. Please use those if you're not, unless you need to know upon failure immediately that did fail. If it's super critical and it can't retry automatically, don't use it. If you can, and you just want to make sure you can call an API or something like that, it's good to utilize it. The next one is a fun one. And what happened was you can query Power BI doing an API call from a web activity, and you can do a refresh of the data set. It's very useful if the data just got refreshed in SQL, that you want to pull all the data back into Power BI, let's say. Something happened and it was out of our control. But basically what happened was we were using the auto-resolve integration runtimes to run this. I don't know if this is still an issue, and I don't really want it to happen again, but someone in West Europe, the whole of West Europe, entered the wrong password wrong 3 times in Power BI. And there was a difference between what ADF product team was doing and whatever Power BI was doing. And Power BI would block any IP. Maybe some of you get where I'm going with this. If that happened. I don't know what the time range was, but we had a major outage because of this. We couldn't refresh from ADF. It was failing, basically because we were using auto-resolve, which is a shared resource. So this Microsoft VM was blocked, which a lot of people were using in West Europe to call Power BI. It was blocked. We got this IP address is blocked. So there was blog posts about it. I was speaking to people on different forums about it. And luckily, I already have self-hosted integration runtimes. So I fixed it very fast within a couple of hours, because I switched from the auto-resolve integration runtime to the self-hosted. I own that IP. That's fine. If I block that, I know that, and I did the boo-boo, or someone did. And also we have DTAP, so someone shouldn't be hitting it from prod, manually going into Power BI. But that happened, and it took down many different people. There was a huge thing about it. So please be careful when you use certain activities as well, that can happen. There could be things outside of your control, that someone blocks something which is nothing to do with your organization. And the funny thing is, when I posted this in a forum as an answer, I actually got a reply from someone, "Oh, thank you, Mr. Microsoft." I have nothing to do for Microsoft. I'm an MVP now, but I do not work for Microsoft. Function apps, they're utilized a lot nowadays, and they're very useful for different parts of whatever you're doing within your platform. But a function app, if it runs over 15 minutes and you want to use it, you need to do a separate activity to monitor that because there's like a default that it can do like a callback with it, which is default at 15 minutes. So if you have a function app, which is like I think it's two durable ones, which can run for X amount of hours, maybe 2-3 hours or something, off the top of my head, then you need to be able to monitor that. So you're doing some transformations with the function app or something like that. Then you need to be able to check how long it's running for. And that it does get use cases like that. We've done that for other customers where people have pulled in data and it takes a long time. And it's very easy to set up. And Microsoft Learn also have a very easy part. You just set up like a different activity and they give you a parameter. You feed that function app call into that and boom, it's already done. And also the retries. I went on about that. Okay. We're coming towards the end. I've got a few more slides, so hopefully I'm not overrunning too much. I apologize, but cool stuff. Fault tolerance. Why I make this very important, and it's got its own slide, is because what you have to read here. If you use this, and if you have rows which are an issue, you select that, you won't know which ones have been skipped. You could skip these rows, and if you're dealing with really critical data, that maybe you've just you skipped a 1 million order, which could be huge for the company, but you skipped it. They don't know about it. It's not going in. Be very careful using that. I don't. I would rather my pipeline fail, and I know which one is the incompatible row. If you skip this, you can set it so it goes into a storage account, but it's not easy. It's easy to set up, yes, don't get me wrong. But what happens in every single pipeline run, it generates a file. That means if you wanted to know if there was an issue, you have to read that file every time. Who you have to homegrown build something to read if there's a row in that file. Okay, something failed. I didn't want to do that, but that is way too much for me to do. I'm lazy. Just fail if it's incompatible. Tell me which row failed. A lot easier. So please be aware of that. You don't want to lose data as well. Cross-tenant. Yes, ADF is very useful for that. I did a lot of migrations recently and I utilized it a lot. And where I will show is a bit of a high design which we did for the customer. And you sort of see, obviously you don't need to see the names, but you'll get the drift. There's ADF here, and you can have a managed VNet private endpoint on your tenant. And say you're going to a cross-tenant, there is scenarios where this happens. You can actually go into a storage account or anything across tenant, and you can pull data from there, and then it's not public whatsoever. You don't have to go over the internet. You can have a private, going over the Microsoft backbone from private endpoint to private endpoint, utilizing Microsoft stuff. You can do this self-hosted as well. You could put a private endpoint across from the VM, which the VM could connect into, and do a private connection like that. You can also utilize that. That's a bit harder to set up, where this one just comes out the box. You put in which resource you want to go to, the full name, whack it over there, and you can actually pull data across tenant. And this works more than just storage accounts. It works for near enough most connectors that I can. I've used it for MongoDB on Cosmos. I've used it for SQL, multiple ways. But you can do cross-tenant connections if you need to. So coming towards the end, what you should get from this and the message is basically use data movement services for what they're good for, efficient ones. Copy activity if you're copying stuff, data flows if you're doing stuff which you need low code, and design it correctly. But if you really have to use it, then okay, but you could use other methods which maybe is faster or cost effective, because if you've already got SQL, maybe just utilize SQL which is already there. You just saw procedures or anything like that. Parallelize the data processing. You don't have to just do a single query. You can go larger, and you can go tremendous. ADF is powerful. People call me a carpenter at ADF. Like I just chisel away at different parts of it and make it work for different use cases, which it's good for. Monitor and tune performance. Yes, and it's not a one-time thing. You have to regularly check that this is working well. Things start deviating from the norm. Maybe you need to check which numbers you're putting in for different ways you're doing the upper bound, lower bound if you're doing that. If you can, forget most things that I said about that and just do the incremental loading. You could use like change data capture. I think that's still in preview, but you could play around with it and see how that works, or do some methodology before the copy activity. So you're just getting the deltas. You can do like what is it called? Watermarks on the data and so on like that to try and bring in the incrementals rather than the full load. Yeah, will work way better. And optimize the storage, data storage and compression. If you're compressing it, if you're moving compressed data across the network, obviously it's smaller, it'll go faster. If you're doing uncompressed data, it's a bit longer. So if you're going from SQL to CSV, that might take longer than Parquet because it'll be a bit more compressed. Okay, I know this is a lot of information to retain, but I really hope you enjoyed it. And this is a longer session than normal because I had a bit more of a bigger demo because I really want to show you live how it happens. But if you have questions, please fire. I haven't been monitoring Teams and I didn't get shouted at. But yeah, that is my session. So thank you for listening.